Alina Marsh had exactly 4 seconds to fix her mistake, and she wasted every single one of them staring at the man she had just called Sweetie. The grand hall of Blackthorn Palace went silent so fast that she heard her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her at once, nobles in dark formal coats, guards with hands frozen halfway to their weapons, a row of advisors near the throne who looked like they had just watched someone step off a cliff. And in the center of it all, seated on a throne carved from black stone, was King Chaol Draven, ruler of the Blackthorn Wolves, the most feared alpha in the 5 territories. Alina had not meant to say it. She had been awake for over 20 hours, her flight delayed twice, her connecting car breaking down on a gravel road outside the palace gates. By the time she was rushed through the front doors and pushed toward the throne room, her mind was foggy, her nerves were frayed, and she had misheard the young aide beside her, who she thought had said, "This is your contact for the day." So when the aide gestured toward the man on the throne and said something too quiet to catch, Alina had smiled with relief, thinking she was finally meeting a mid-level official who would walk her through the trade paperwork. "Thanks, sweetie," she had said. "That is exactly what I needed to hear." Only after the words left her mouth did she notice the low growl rippling through the crowd behind her, and the way every single guard in the room had gone rigid. She turned back to the throne, already knowing she had made a terrible error. King Chaol Draven was not smiling. He was not scowling either. He was staring at her the way a man stares at something he cannot explain, his dark eyes catching a strange golden shimmer that had not been there a moment before. His jaw was tight. His hands, resting on the arms of his throne, had curled slightly, claws pressing faint crescents into the stone. Alina had read enough briefing papers to know what that golden shimmer meant. It meant the wolf inside him was close to the surface. It meant something had triggered him, and triggering an Alpha King in a room full of his own court was not a mistake anyone survived without consequences. "Your Majesty," she said quickly, her voice cracking with panic. "I am so sorry. I did not realize who you were. Please forgive me. It was an honest mistake. I would never." "Enough," Chaol said. The single word cut through the room like a blade, and Alina flinched, certain she was about to be dragged out by the guards on either side of the hall. She glanced sideways and saw 2 wolves in dark uniforms already stepping toward her, hands reaching for her arms. Chaol raised one hand, and they stopped instantly. "Leave her," he said. "Nobody touches her." The order landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples of confusion spread through the crowd. An older woman near the front, dressed in deep violet robes, exchanged a sharp look with a man beside her. A younger noblewoman near the second row narrowed her eyes at Alina, with something that looked far more dangerous than confusion. It looked like jealousy. Alina did not understand any of it. She only knew that the king of the most powerful wolf pack in the territories was looking at her like she had said something impossible, not something rude, and his wolf was reacting in a way she had never read about in any briefing document. She had come to Blackthorn territory for one reason. Her government had sent her as a liaison to negotiate new trade terms between the human settlements along the eastern border and the shifter kingdoms that controlled the mountain passes. It was supposed to be simple: meet the appointed contact, review the trade documents, confirm safe passage routes for merchants, and return home within the week. Nobody had told her that her plane would be delayed by a storm system over the coastal range. Nobody had told her that the car sent to collect her would break down 20 miles from the palace, forcing her to wait on the side of a gravel road while a new vehicle was arranged. And certainly nobody had told her that by the time she finally arrived, exhausted, disheveled, and unbriefed, she would be marched straight into a formal court audience instead of a private meeting room. The young aide who had greeted her at the entrance, a nervous man named Milo, had barely gotten out 3 sentences of instruction before ushering her through the towering doors of the throne room. Alina had assumed the contact standing at the center of the hall was some kind of steward or minister assigned to oversee trade matters. She had no idea the entire court was gathered for a separate ceremonial matter, and that she had stumbled straight into the middle of it. Now, standing in the center of the hall with every eye in the room fixed on her, she understood her mistake in full, horrifying detail. Chaol rose from his throne. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark coat that fit him like it had been made from a single piece of shadow. He moved down the 3 low steps from the throne platform with a slow, deliberate grace that made the room feel smaller with every step he took. Alina had to force herself not to step backward. "I apologize for the confusion, Your Majesty," she said again, forcing her voice to stay steady even though her pulse was hammering. "I was told I would be meeting a liaison contact. I did not know you were the king. If I offended you, I am truly sorry." Chaol stopped a few feet in front of her. Up close, his eyes were a deep brown that seemed to hold flecks of amber, and for a moment the strange golden shimmer she had noticed earlier returned, brighter this time, before fading again like a tide pulling back. "What is your name?" he asked. "Alina Marsh," she said. "I am the human liaison sent to finalize the trade agreement for the eastern settlements." Behind Kale, the advisor in dark blue robes, a lean man with sharp cheekbones and calculating eyes, took a slow step closer. His name, she would later learn, was Corwin Blake, and he was the king's most trusted counselor. He was studying Alina with an intensity that made her uncomfortable, as though he were solving a puzzle in real time. Kale did not look away from her. "You will remain in the palace," he said. Alina blinked. "I am sorry." "What?" "For the duration of the negotiations," he continued, as if her confusion were irrelevant. "You will stay here, in the palace, rather than the guest quarters in the outer village. It will be more efficient." A murmur rippled through the crowd again, louder this time. The noblewoman in the second row, the one with the sharp, jealous eyes, stiffened visibly. An older man near the throne muttered something to the woman beside him, and she shook her head slowly, looking almost worried. Alina glanced around the room, trying to read the reactions, trying to understand what unspoken rule she had just watched the king break. Everything about the atmosphere told her this was not normal. Kings did not personally invite human liaisons to stay inside their private palace. Kings did not rise from their throne to address a stranger's apology, and kings certainly did not have their wolves surge to the surface over the word "sweetie." "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "I appreciate the offer, but I do not want to be a burden. The guest quarters in the village will be more than comfortable, and I would not want to disrupt palace protocol any further than I already have today." "It is decided," Kale said, his tone final in a way that left no room for argument. "Milo will show you to your rooms. We will resume formal negotiations tomorrow." He turned and walked back toward the throne, his dark coat sweeping behind him, and the moment he sat down again, the court seemed to remember how to breathe. Conversations resumed in hushed, urgent tones. The noblewoman with the sharp eyes was already whispering furiously to the woman beside her. Corwin Blake remained where he was for a long moment, staring at Alina with an unreadable expression, before finally turning to follow his king. Milo appeared at Alina's side almost instantly, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly as he gestured toward a side corridor. "This way, my lady," he said quietly. "Please, this way." Alina followed him out of the throne room, aware of the weight of dozens of stairs following her every step. She did not look back at the throne. She did not trust herself to see whatever expression was on the king's face, not after what she had just witnessed. Once they were through the heavy doors and into a quieter hallway lined with tall windows, Alina finally let out the breath she had been holding. "I am so sorry," she said to Milo. "I did not know. Nobody told me who he was before I walked in." Milo's hands were still shaking slightly as he adjusted the collar of his uniform. "It is not your fault, my lady," he said, though his voice suggested he did not fully believe his own words. "Nobody could have prepared you for that." "For what exactly?" Alina asked. "What just happened in there?" Milo hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if checking whether anyone was listening. "I am not the right person to explain it," he said finally. "But I would be careful, my lady. Whatever happened back there, the whole court saw it. And in a place like this, that means everyone will have an opinion about you by morning." Alina wanted to press him further, but something in his expression told her he genuinely did not want to say more, whether out of loyalty, fear, or simple uncertainty about what he had witnessed himself. They walked in silence through a series of corridors, past tall arched windows that looked out over dark forested hills, past portraits of past rulers with sharp, watchful eyes painted into every canvas. The palace felt ancient and heavy, as if the walls themselves remembered centuries of history that Alina had no context for. Milo finally stopped before a set of carved wooden doors near the eastern wing. "These will be your quarters," he said. "Someone will bring your belongings shortly. If you need anything, there is a bell by the door." "Thank you," Alina said, though her mind was still spinning from everything that had happened in the throne room. Milo lingered a moment longer, his eyes flicking toward her with something like sympathy. "Get some rest, my lady," he said. "Tomorrow will likely be difficult." He left before she could ask what he meant by that. Alina stepped into the room and closed the door behind her, leaning back against it as the events of the last hour replayed in her mind. The silence, the stares, the way the king's eyes had shimmered gold, just for a moment, right after she called him sweetie, by complete accident. She had traveled here to negotiate trade routes and safe passage for merchants. She had not traveled here to somehow catch the attention of the most powerful wolf in the territories, and yet some instinct deep inside her, some quiet, unshakable feeling, told her that whatever she had witnessed in that throne room was only the very beginning of something much larger. Outside her window, the sun was beginning to set over the dark hills of Blackthorn territory, and somewhere in the palace, she knew, the king was probably still thinking about the same strange, impossible moment that she could not stop replaying either. Alina had no idea that in a private chamber not far from her own, King Cale Draven was standing at his window with his hands braced against the stone sill, his wolf pacing restlessly beneath his skin for the first time in over a decade, utterly certain of something the rest of the world had not yet caught up to. She had called him Sweetie by mistake. His wolf had not reacted to a mistake. It had reacted to her. Alina woke before sunrise, her body still aching from the long journey, her mind circling back to the throne room the moment her eyes opened. She lay still for a moment, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling of her palace chamber, listening to the quiet sounds of the estate coming to life outside her window, birds calling from the dark hillside forest, the distant clatter of someone moving crates in a courtyard below, a pair of low voices passing beneath her window, speaking too quietly for her to make out the words. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the king's face again, the strange golden shimmer in his eyes, the way the entire hall had gone silent, as if the air itself had frozen. A soft knock at her door pulled her fully awake. "My lady," Milo's voice called from the hallway, "I have brought breakfast, and fresh clothing has been arranged for you. The king wishes to resume negotiations within the hour." Alina sat up quickly, smoothing down her hair, trying to gather herself into something resembling composure. "Give me a few minutes," she called back. When she opened the door, Milo stood there with a tray of food and a folded set of clothes draped over one arm, his expression still carrying traces of the nervous energy from the day before. "How are you feeling, my lady?" he asked, setting the tray down on a small table near the window. "Confused, mostly," Alina admitted, "and a little worried." Milo hesitated, glancing toward the door as though checking the hallway was empty. "You should know," he said quietly, "that what happened yesterday is already being discussed across the entire palace. Servants, guards, nobles. Everyone has a theory." "What kind of theories?" Alina asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. Milo's face colored slightly. "Some say you insulted him and he is deciding how to punish you slowly, as a lesson to others. Some say you are secretly a spy sent to distract him during trade talks. And some," he added, lowering his voice even further, "believe something else entirely. Something involving old wolf traditions." "What traditions?" Alina pressed. Milo shook his head quickly. "That is not something I should explain, my lady. I am only a junior aide. If you want real answers, you should speak with Corwin Blake. He understands things about the king that almost nobody else does." Before Alina could ask anything further, Milo excused himself, promising to return within the hour to escort her to the negotiation chamber. Alina ate quickly, her appetite dulled by nerves, and dressed in the clothing that had been provided, a simple but elegant dark green dress that fit her surprisingly well, as if someone had guessed her measurements with unsettling accuracy. When Milo returned, he led her not back toward the grand throne room, but through a quieter corridor toward a smaller meeting chamber near the eastern wing. Alina felt a small measure of relief at that. At least this time she would not be walking into a room full of hundreds of watching eyes. The chamber was warm and softly lit, with a long wooden table already set with documents, ink, and a carafe of water. Cale Draven stood near the window when she entered, his back to the door, his hands clasped behind him. He turned as she stepped inside, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Good morning, Your Majesty," Alina said carefully, unsure how formal she should be after everything that had happened. "Good morning," he replied, his voice calmer than it had been the day before, though there was something guarded in his tone. "Please, sit." Alina took a seat across from him at the long table, and Corwin Blake entered a moment later, carrying a stack of folders under one arm. He took a seat near the end of the table, positioning himself where he could observe both Alina and the king with equal attention. For the first hour, the negotiations proceeded almost normally. They discussed trade routes through the mountain passes, safe travel corridors for merchants, and adjustments to tariffs on goods moving between human settlements and shifter territories. Alina found herself relaxing slightly as the conversation settled into familiar professional territory, the kind of work she had trained for and understood. Cale was sharp, direct, and surprisingly reasonable in his positions, more willing to compromise than she had expected from someone with his reputation. Several times she caught him watching her a beat longer than necessary before responding to a point she had raised, but she told herself it was simply the natural caution of a ruler evaluating an unfamiliar negotiator. It was during a brief pause, while Corwin flipped through a folder of shipping records, that Cale finally spoke about something other than trade. "You handled yesterday better than most would have," he said quietly. Alina looked up, surprised. "I nearly caused an international incident by accident," she said. "I am not sure that counts as handling it well." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. "You apologized honestly. You did not grovel, and you did not pretend it did not happen. Most people in this court would have done one or the other." "I did not know who you were," Alina admitted. "If I had known, I promise you, I would have been far more careful with my words." Cale's expression shifted slightly, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. "I know," he said. Corwin cleared his throat pointedly, closing the folder in front of him. "If we may return to the matter of the northern shipping routes, Your Majesty," he said, his tone carrying a subtle warning that Alina did not fully understand but noticed nonetheless. The negotiations continued for another hour before Cale called for a break, announcing that they would resume after midday. As the meeting dispersed, Corwin lingered behind, waiting until Milo had escorted Alina toward the door before speaking quietly to the king. Alina, walking just ahead of them, caught only a fragment of the conversation, Corwin's low voice saying something about instinct and recognition, and Cale's firm reply cutting him off entirely. "That is enough, Corwin," Cale said, his voice edged with something that sounded almost like warning. "Not here." Alina did not turn around, but she filed the words away carefully, certain now that whatever had happened in the throne room the day before was far from a simple misunderstanding and far from over. Later that afternoon, while wandering the palace gardens during a break in negotiations, Alina found herself unexpectedly approached by a tall, elegant woman with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. It took her a moment to recognize her as the noblewoman from the throne room, the one whose expression had darkened the moment Cale offered Alina rooms inside the palace. "You must be the human liaison everyone is talking about," the woman said, her voice smooth but edged with something sharp beneath the surface. "I am Lady Seraphine Vane." "Alina Marsh," she replied carefully, sensing immediately that this conversation would require caution. Seraphine studied her for a long moment, the kind of assessment that made Alina feel like a specimen being examined under glass. "You should be careful here, little liaison," Seraphine said finally. "Palaces like this one are not kind to humans who accidentally draw the wrong kind of attention." "I did not mean to draw any attention at all," Alina said honestly. "It was a simple mistake." Seraphine's smile did not reach her eyes. "Mistakes have consequences all the same," she said. "Some consequences are worse than others." Before Alina could respond, Seraphine turned and walked away, her long dark cloak trailing behind her like a shadow, leaving Alina standing alone in the garden with a growing sense that whatever quiet storm had begun in the throne room the day before was only just starting to gather strength, and that she had unknowingly placed herself directly in its path. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains surrounding Blackthorn territory, Alina sat by her window, going over the day's events in her mind, the negotiations, the strange warmth in the king's voice when he had spoken to her privately, the warning from Lady Seraphine, the fragment of conversation about instinct and recognition that Corwin had tried to explain before Cale silenced him. She did not fully understand what was happening yet, but she understood enough to know that something significant had shifted the moment she walked into that throne room, something that reached far beyond a simple accidental greeting, and something that the entire palace, in its own quiet and watchful way, was already bracing itself for. A scream echoed through the palace hallway just before dawn, and Alina bolted upright in bed, her heart slamming against her ribs. For a moment she thought she had imagined it, some fragment of a dream carried into waking. Then she heard it again, sharper this time, followed by the sound of running footsteps and raised voices somewhere near the eastern wing. She threw on a robe and opened her door just as Milo came rushing down the corridor, his face pale, his uniform half-fastened. "What happened?" Alina asked, stepping into the hallway. "One of the kitchen staff found intruder tracks near the northern wall," Milo said quickly, his breath coming fast. "Wolves, not from this pack. The guards are searching the grounds now." Alina felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "Is anyone hurt?" "No," Milo said. "Whoever it was fled before they were spotted. But the king has ordered the entire palace searched, and increased security everywhere, including your wing." Alina spent the rest of the morning confined to her chambers, while guards moved through the corridors outside, their low voices carrying occasional words she caught through the door. Rival pack, border, watching her. By midday, Milo returned to escort her to the negotiation chamber, though the mood in the palace had shifted entirely from the day before. Guards stood at every corner now, their eyes sharp and alert. Servants moved quickly and quietly, avoiding eye contact, as though the entire building were holding its breath. When Alina entered the meeting chamber, she found Kale standing at the head of the table, his expression tense in a way she had not seen before, his shoulders set with barely restrained tension. "Your Majesty," she said carefully, "is everything all right?" "Sit," Kale said, his voice clipped. She sat, and Corwin entered a moment later, closing the door firmly behind him. "There was an intrusion near the northern boundary last night," Kale said without preamble. "Scouts from the Thornridge Pack, testing our defenses. It is the third such incident this month." Alina frowned. "Is this connected to the trade negotiations?" "Possibly," Corwin said, taking his seat at the end of the table. "The Thornridge Pack has long opposed any formal alliance between Blackthorn and the human settlements. They believe closer ties with humans will weaken pack traditions and shift the balance of power in the region. And they are willing to send scouts onto Blackthorn land to make that point," Alina said slowly. "They are willing to do far more than send scouts if given the opportunity," Kale said, his eyes meeting hers directly. "Which is why I need you to understand something clearly. Your presence here has already drawn attention, both from rival packs and from factions within my own court who are unhappy with the direction these negotiations are taking." Alina's stomach tightened. "Are you saying I am in danger?" "I am saying," Kale replied evenly, "that from this point forward, you will not leave the palace grounds without an escort, and you will not wander the gardens or outer courtyards alone, regardless of how safe it may feel during daylight hours." Alina wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she was a grown woman capable of assessing her own safety, but something in Kale's tone told her this was not a matter open for negotiation. "Understood," she said instead. The morning session continued, though the atmosphere remained tense. Every conversation about trade routes and tariffs, shadowed by the unspoken knowledge that forces beyond the negotiation table were already moving against them. Alina found herself watching Kale more closely than before, noticing the way his eyes occasionally drifted toward the windows, scanning the tree line beyond the palace walls as though searching for movement. During a brief pause in the discussion, while Corwin stepped out to retrieve additional documents, Alina found herself alone with Kale for the first time since their private exchange the previous day. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. Kale glanced up from the papers in front of him. "Go ahead." "Why did you really invite me to stay in the palace?" she asked. "And do not tell me it was simply more efficient. I do not believe that was the whole reason." Kale was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tightening slightly as though weighing how much to say. Finally, he set down his pen and met her eyes directly. "There are things about how my kind works that would sound strange to someone unfamiliar with our traditions," he said carefully. "Reactions that happen sometimes, rarely, between two people, that are not fully within a person's control." Alina's pulse quickened. "What kind of reactions?" Before Kale could answer, the door opened and Corwin returned with a fresh stack of folders, and the moment passed as quickly as it had arrived. Kale's expression shuddered instantly, the openness in his eyes replaced by careful neutrality, and the conversation shifted back to trade tariffs, as though nothing had been said at all. Alina spent the rest of the afternoon replaying his words in her mind, certain now that whatever he had been about to explain was directly connected to the strange golden shimmer she had seen in his eyes that first day, and to the whispered conversation between Kale and Corwin that she had overheard in the hallway. That evening, as she made her way back toward her chambers under the careful watch of two palace guards, Alina noticed Lady Seraphine standing near a stone archway at the end of the corridor, watching her approach with an expression of cold, calculating patience. "Word travels quickly through a palace like this one," Seraphine said as Alina drew closer. "I hear there was an intrusion near the northern wall last night. How fortunate that the king has decided to place guards around you personally." "I did not ask for special protection," Alina said evenly. "No," Seraphine agreed, her smile thin and sharp. "But you received it all the same, did you not? Strange, how quickly a king's priorities can shift." "What are you trying to tell me?" Alina asked directly, tired of the veiled implications. Seraphine's expression hardened slightly, the cold mask slipping just enough to reveal something more raw underneath, something that looked almost like genuine hurt beneath the practiced disdain. "I am telling you, little liaison, that some of us have waited years for a king's attention, only to watch it fall instantly and completely upon someone who arrived by accident and does not even understand what she has stumbled into." Before Alina could respond, Seraphine turned and walked away, her cloak sweeping around the corner and out of sight, leaving Alina standing alone in the quiet corridor with a growing, uneasy certainty that the strange reaction in the throne room, the private conversation Kale had almost finished, and the sharp jealousy radiating from Lady Seraphine were all pieces of the same larger puzzle, one that she still did not have enough information to fully understand. As she finally reached her chambers and closed the door behind her, Alina sat by the window once more, staring out at the dark tree line where, somewhere beyond the palace walls, rival scouts had moved through the shadows only hours earlier. She thought of Cale's guarded expression, the words he had almost said, and the strange, unshakable feeling that whatever storm was building around her was growing larger and closer with every passing day, whether she understood it yet or not. The letter arrived wrapped around an arrow, embedded in the wooden frame of Alina's window, and by the time she noticed it, her hands were already shaking. She had woken early, drawn to the window by the pale gray light of dawn, and it took her a moment to realize the thin, dark shaft lodged in the wooden frame outside was not decoration. A small rolled parchment was tied to it with a strip of leather cord. Alina called for the guards immediately, and within minutes Milo arrived, followed closely by 2 armed sentries and, moments later, by Cale himself, his expression darkening the instant he saw the arrow. "Do not touch it," he said sharply, crossing the room in a few long strides. "I was not planning to," Alina said, stepping back to give him space. One of the guards carefully removed the parchment while Cale examined the arrowhead, his jaw tightening as he turned it over in his hands. "Thornridge craftsmanship," he said quietly. "This was not random." Corwin arrived moments later, out of breath, and took the parchment from the guard, unrolling it carefully. His eyes scanned the short message written across it, and his expression shifted from concern to something closer to alarm. "What does it say?" Alina asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Corwin hesitated, glancing at Cale before answering. "It says the human liaison should return home while she still can," he said finally. "It is signed with the mark of the Thornridge Pack." Alina felt the room tilt slightly around her. "They are threatening me directly now," she said. "They are testing how far they can push before Blackthorn responds," Cale said, his voice low and controlled in a way that somehow felt more dangerous than shouting would have. "And they chose to test it by threatening someone under my protection." Corwin cleared his throat carefully. "Your Majesty, this changes the political calculation significantly. If word spreads that Thornridge scouts breached palace grounds and left a direct threat against a human liaison, other packs may interpret it as a sign of instability within Blackthorn borders." Cale's eyes did not leave Alina's face. "Then we will make certain no one interprets it that way," he said. Over the following hour, the palace transformed into something resembling a fortress under quiet, controlled alarm. Additional guards were stationed along every corridor. Patrols along the northern boundary doubled in size. Cale called an emergency meeting with his senior commanders, and Alina found herself waiting anxiously in her chambers, unable to focus on anything, replaying the moment she had first noticed the arrow lodged in her window frame. When Milo finally came to collect her for what should have been the day's negotiation session, he informed her instead that formal talks had been postponed, and that Cale wished to speak with her privately in a smaller chamber near the palace's western tower. The room Milo led her to was smaller and more private than the negotiation chamber, its tall windows overlooking a quiet inner courtyard rather than the open grounds beyond the palace walls. Cale was already there when she arrived, standing near the window, his back straight and tense. "I want to apologize," he said the moment she stepped inside, before she could speak at all. Alina blinked, caught off guard. "For what?" "For placing you in danger," he said, turning to face her fully. "You came here to negotiate a trade agreement, not to become a target for rival packs testing my authority. Whatever happened between us in that throne room, whatever reaction my wolf had, it should never have put your safety at risk." Alina studied him carefully, noticing the genuine weight behind his words, the way his usual controlled composure had cracked just slightly to reveal something rawer underneath. "You still have not told me what that reaction actually was," she said quietly. Cale was silent for a long moment, his eyes searching hers as though weighing once again how much truth she was ready to receive. "Among wolves," he said finally, "there is a bond that occasionally forms between two people, something instinctual, something neither person chooses consciously. It is rare. Many wolves live their entire lives without ever experiencing it. My own wolf had gone quiet for so many years that I stopped believing it would ever happen for me at all. And then I called you sweetie by accident," Alina said slowly, piecing it together. Cale's mouth twitched, something almost like a smile flickering briefly across his tense expression. "And then you called me sweetie by accident," he agreed. "And for the first time in over a decade, my wolf reacted to another living person as though it recognized something it had been waiting for." Alina's breath caught in her throat. "Are you saying I am your Mate, Kale finished quietly, the word landing heavily in the space between them. That is what the reaction meant. That is what the reaction meant, and that is why half the palace has spent the last 2 days treating you like something between a miracle and a threat. Alina sat down slowly in the nearest chair, her mind spinning as the pieces finally clicked into place. Lady Seraphine's cold jealousy, Corwin's careful, guarded explanations, the whispered conversation she had overheard in the hallway, the unusual privileges Kale had extended to her from the very first moment, privileges that made no logical sense for a simple trade liaison. "This is not something I chose," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "I know," Kale said. "And it is not something I fully understand either," she added. "I know that as well," he said, taking a slow step closer, though he stopped a respectful distance away, clearly conscious of not overwhelming her further. "I am not asking you to accept anything you are not ready for, Alina. I only wanted you to understand the truth, especially now that your safety is genuinely at risk because of it." Alina looked up at him, searching his expression for any hint of manipulation or hidden agenda, and found only quiet, careful honesty staring back at her. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. Kale nodded once, his shoulders relaxing slightly, as though a weight he had been carrying since the throne room had finally lifted, at least partially. "There is something else you should know," he said after a moment. "Given the threat against you, and given what my wolf has already revealed to the entire court, I believe it would be safer, both politically and physically, if you remained under closer protection for the remainder of the negotiations. Not confinement," he added quickly, seeing the flash of resistance in her eyes. "Simply additional security, closer to my own quarters, where Thornridge scouts would find it significantly harder to reach you." Alina considered this carefully, weighing her instinct toward independence against the very real danger of the arrow that had been lodged in her window only hours earlier. "All right," she said finally, "but I want to be involved in every decision regarding my own safety, not simply informed of arrangements after they are made." "Agreed," Kale said, something like relief flickering across his features. As Alina rose to leave the chamber, escorted once again by Milo toward a new set of rooms closer to the palace's central wing, she found herself replaying Kale's words over and over in her mind. Might. A bond neither person chose consciously. A wolf that had gone silent for over a decade before reacting to a simple, accidental greeting. She did not know yet what she believed about fate, or instinct, or whatever ancient wolf tradition had apparently decided her life was now permanently intertwined with a king she had known for less than 3 days. But she knew, with growing certainty, that whatever was happening between them was far too significant, and far too dangerous, for her to simply walk away from without understanding it fully first. 2 weeks passed, and Alina had still not grown used to the sound of guards changing shifts outside her new chambers every 4 hours, a rhythm that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Her new room sat close to Kale's private wing, a location Corwin had approved only after inspecting every possible approach a rival scout might use to reach her. The windows were fitted with reinforced shutters. 2 guards stood watch at all times, day and night. And though Alina understood the necessity of it all, there were moments, particularly in the quiet hours before dawn, when the constant vigilance made her feel less like a protected guest, and more like a carefully guarded secret. Still, life within the palace had settled into an unexpected rhythm. Negotiations over trade routes had resumed, slower now, weighed down by the additional layer of political tension surrounding her presence, but progressing nonetheless. Alina found herself spending long hours in the negotiation chamber with Kale and Corwin, hammering out details on tariffs, safe passage corridors, and shared resource agreements between human settlements and Blackthorn territory. What surprised her most was how different Kale became in these smaller, quieter settings compared to the imposing figure she had first encountered in the throne room. He listened carefully to her counterproposals, adjusted his positions when her arguments made sense, and occasionally revealed flashes of dry humor that caught her completely off guard. "You negotiate like someone who has been doing this far longer than your files suggest," he said one afternoon, reviewing a revised tariff schedule she had drafted overnight. "I grew up watching my parents run a trading business along the coastal settlements," Alina said. "I learned early that the person who prepares the most thoroughly usually wins the argument." "A useful lesson," Kale said, something like genuine admiration flickering across his expression, before he caught himself and returned his attention to the documents in front of him. Their conversations outside of formal negotiations grew steadily more comfortable as well, though Alina remained cautious about how quickly her guarded feelings toward him seemed to be softening. She reminded herself often that whatever instinctual bond his wolf had recognized did not obligate her to anything, and that she remained free to build, or not build, a relationship with him based on her own choices rather than ancient wolf tradition. Kale, to his credit, never pushed the matter. He treated her with careful respect, never presuming familiarity she had not offered, never using the language of fate or destiny to pressure her feelings in any particular direction. It was this restraint, more than anything else, that slowly began chipping away at her guarded caution. One evening, after a particularly long session reviewing merchant safety protocols, Kale invited her to walk with him through the palace's inner courtyard, a small enclosed garden protected on all sides by high stone walls and heavily guarded gates. "I thought you might appreciate some fresh air that does not require an armed escort standing directly beside you," he said, as they stepped outside into the cool evening air. Alina laughed softly, the first genuine laugh she had allowed herself since arriving at Blackthorn. "That would be a welcome change," she admitted. They walked slowly along a stone path lined with dark flowering shrubs, the last light of sunset casting long shadows across the courtyard. For a while, neither of them spoke, simply enjoying the rare quiet after days of tense negotiations and constant vigilance. "Can I ask you something personal?" Alina said finally. Kale glanced at her, his expression open. "Of course. What was your life like, before all of this? Before you became king? Before any of the wolf traditions and political pressures?" Kale was quiet for a moment, considering the question carefully. "I became king younger than most," he said finally. "My father died unexpectedly, and I inherited the throne before I had fully grown into who I wanted to be as a person, rather than simply as a ruler. There was very little time for anything resembling an ordinary life." "That sounds lonely," Alina said quietly. "It was," Kale admitted, something raw and honest slipping through his usual careful composure. "My wolf went silent not long after I took the throne. I told myself it was simply the weight of responsibility settling in, but privately, I wondered if some part of me had simply closed itself off entirely, unable to handle anything beyond the demands of ruling. And then a very tired, very jet-lagged trade liaison called you sweetie in front of your entire court," Alina said, a small smile tugging at her lips. Kale actually laughed at that, a low, genuine sound that transformed his usually serious features into something younger, lighter. "And then that happened," he agreed. They continued walking in comfortable silence for a while longer before Kale spoke again, his tone more serious now. "I want you to know," he said, "that regardless of what my wolf recognized in that throne room, I have no intention of pressuring you into anything you are not genuinely ready for. Whatever happens between us, I want it to be something you choose freely, not something you feel obligated toward because of instinct or tradition." Alina looked at him carefully, searching his expression for any hint of insincerity, and found none. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "It means more than you probably realize." As they returned toward the palace entrance, the guards falling into step around them once more, Alina felt something shift quietly within her, some small crack forming in the careful wall of caution she had built around herself since arriving at Blackthorn. She was not ready to fully name what she felt toward Kale, not yet, but she could no longer deny that whatever it was, it had grown considerably stronger than simple professional obligation over the past 2 weeks. That night, as she prepared for bed in her heavily guarded chambers, Alina caught her own reflection in the mirror and found herself smiling faintly, thinking not of trade negotiations or rival pacts, but of the sound of Kale's genuine laughter echoing across the quiet courtyard. She did not yet know where this strange, unexpected path would lead her, but for the first time since the whole ordeal began, she found herself curious rather than afraid to find out. Lady Seraphine's hand struck the polished table so hard that the ink pot at its center rattled, and Alina barely stopped herself from flinching at the sudden noise. It had started as a routine council meeting, one Alina had been invited to observe as part of the ongoing trade negotiations, since several senior nobles wanted direct input on how the new agreements might affect their own territories. She had expected discussions about tariffs and shipping schedules. She had not expected to become the center of a heated confrontation less than 20 minutes into the session. It began when one of the older council members raised a cautious question about the wisdom of continuing negotiations while palace security remained on high alert due to the Thornridge threats. Almost immediately, Seraphine seized the opening. "Perhaps we should ask ourselves why palace security is on high alert at all," Seraphine said, her voice carrying clearly across the council chamber. "Blackthorn has stood strong for generations without needing to place an entire wing on lockdown for the sake of one human visitor." Alina felt every eye in the room shift toward her, and she forced herself to remain calm, keeping her expression neutral despite the heat rising in her chest. The security measures are a response to direct threats against palace guests, Corwin said evenly, seated near the head of the table. Not an overreaction to her presence. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. Direct threats that only began after she arrived, she countered. Perhaps the wisest course of action would be to reconsider whether these negotiations are worth the instability they have introduced. Are you suggesting we abandon trade talks entirely? Corwin asked, his tone carefully controlled. I am suggesting, Seraphine said, rising slightly from her seat, that some among us have begun to wonder whether this entire situation has been engineered from the very beginning. A convenient accident in the throne room. A sudden invitation to remain in the palace under the king's personal protection. How fortunate that a simple trade liaison happened to trigger a reaction that has not occurred in over a decade. The accusation landed like a physical blow, and Alina felt her face flush with a mixture of anger and disbelief. That is not what happened, Alina said firmly, refusing to let the accusation stand unchallenged. I did not orchestrate anything. I did not even know who the king was when I made that mistake. A convenient story, Seraphine said coldly, turning her sharp gaze directly onto Alina. Easy to claim ignorance now that the damage has already been done. I understand this situation is difficult for you, Alina said carefully, choosing her words with deliberate control despite her rising frustration, but I did not choose any of this. I did not ask for guards or special quarters or any of the attention that has followed. If anything, it has made my work here significantly more complicated. Complicated, Seraphine repeated, her voice sharp with disbelief. You have secured the personal protection of the most powerful alpha in the 5 territories within your first week here, and you call that complicated? Before Alina could respond, the chamber doors opened, and Kale entered, his presence immediately silencing the room. He had clearly caught the tail end of the exchange, his expression darkening as he took in Seraphine's accusatory tone and Alina's flushed, frustrated expression. Lady Seraphine, he said, his voice deceptively calm in a way that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. I trust you have a legitimate concern to raise, rather than simply an opportunity to publicly interrogate a guest under my protection. Seraphine's jaw tightened, but she did not back down entirely. I am merely raising the concerns that half this council has whispered privately for weeks, Your Majesty, she said. Concerns about whether this human liaison's sudden influence over palace decisions represents a genuine bond, or a very convenient manipulation. Kale's eyes hardened, and for a moment Alina saw a flash of the formidable Alpha King she had first encountered in the throne room, the one whose reputation had preceded him across the entire region. If you have evidence to support such an accusation, he said, his voice low and controlled, I invite you to present it formally, before this entire council. Otherwise, I would advise against making baseless claims against someone who has done nothing except respond honestly to circumstances entirely beyond her control. The room fell into tense silence. Seraphine held Kale's gaze for a long moment before finally lowering her eyes, sitting back into her chair with visible reluctance. I withdraw the accusation, Your Majesty, she said stiffly, though her tone made clear the words were spoken out of necessity rather than genuine conviction. The meeting resumed shortly after, though the tension in the room lingered for the remainder of the session, and Alina found it increasingly difficult to focus on the trade documents in front of her. When the council finally adjourned, she left the chamber quickly, needing air, needing distance from the weight of dozens of watching, judging eyes. Kale caught up with her in a quiet corridor just outside the chamber, his expression concerned. Are you all right? He asked. I am fine, Alina said, though her voice betrayed the tension she was still holding on to. I just was not prepared for that level of hostility. I should have anticipated it, Kale said, frustration evident in his tone. Seraphine has wanted a formal position in this court for years. She has always assumed it would eventually be beside me. My wolf's reaction to you threatened that assumption in a single moment, and pride does not accept that kind of loss gracefully. Alina studied him carefully. Is there any truth to what she said? Have people genuinely questioned whether I orchestrated any of this? Some, Kale admitted honestly. Fear and jealousy tend to invent convenient explanations when the truth feels too uncertain to accept. But those who have actually spent time observing you, rather than simply gossiping about you, know exactly how absurd that accusation truly is. Alina appreciated his honesty, even as the weight of the accusation continued to settle uncomfortably in her chest. I did not come here for any of this, she said quietly. I came here to negotiate a trade agreement, and now half the palace believes I manipulated an ancient wolf tradition to secure political favor. I know, Kale said gently, and I am sorry that my wolf's reaction has placed that burden on you. But I want you to understand something clearly. Whatever doubts exist within this court, I have none. I know precisely what happened in that throne room. And I know it was neither planned nor manufactured by anyone. Alina looked up at him, searching his expression once more, and found only steady, unwavering conviction staring back at her. "Thank you," she said quietly. As they stood together in the quiet corridor, the weight of Seraphine's accusations still hanging heavily in the air between them, Alina realized with growing certainty that the political storm surrounding her presence at Blackthorn was far from finished, and that whatever came next would require far more than careful diplomacy to navigate safely. A messenger collapsed at the palace gates just after midnight, blood soaking through the shoulder of his torn uniform, and within minutes, the entire eastern wing was awake and moving. Alina heard the commotion from her chambers, and threw on a robe, stepping into the corridor just as guards rushed past her toward the main entrance. Milo appeared moments later, his face pale and urgent. "What happened?" Alina asked immediately. "A scout returning from the northern border," he said, his breath quick. "He was ambushed near Thornridge territory. He made it back, but barely." "Is he going to be all right?" Alina asked. "The healers are with him now," Milo said. "But my lady, the message he carried before the attack, it concerns you directly." Alina's stomach dropped. "What message?" Milo hesitated. "You should hear it from the king," he said finally. "Please, come with me." They hurried through the corridors toward the war room, a chamber Alina had not yet entered, its walls lined with detailed maps of the surrounding territories. Kale stood at the center of the room, his expression grim, Corwin beside him along with several senior commanders Alina did not recognize. "Your Majesty," Alina said as she entered, "what is happening?" Kale turned to face her, and the raw concern in his eyes told her immediately that whatever news had arrived was serious. "The scout confirmed what we suspected," he said. "Thornridge is mobilizing forces along our northern border, under the pretense of routine patrols. But their numbers are far larger than any routine patrol would require." "Are they preparing to attack?" Alina asked. "They are preparing to force a confrontation," Corwin said grimly. "And based on the intercepted communications the scout managed to recover before he was attacked, their justification centers directly on you." Alina felt the blood drain from her face. "Me?" Kale's jaw tightened. "Thornridge has framed the ongoing trade negotiations and my wolf's reaction to you specifically as evidence that Blackthorn has grown weak, too willing to align with humans at the expense of traditional wolf strength. They intend to use this moment to challenge Blackthorn's authority over the region, potentially through direct conflict." "This is my fault," Alina said quietly, horror settling into her chest. "No," Kale said firmly, crossing the room to stand directly in front of her. "This is Thornridge using any excuse available to challenge Blackthorn's power. If it had not been you, they would have found another justification eventually. Political tensions between our packs existed long before you arrived. But my presence gave them a convenient narrative," Alina said. "Perhaps if I return home now, if I simply leave and let the political situation settle, the threat of conflict might ease." Kale's expression darkened immediately. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice sharp with an intensity that surprised her. "Leaving now would only confirm exactly the narrative Thornridge wants to spread, that Blackthorn bows to pressure and abandons commitments the moment conflict threatens. It would embolden them further, not weaken their resolve." Corwin stepped forward, his tone more measured but equally firm. "Your Majesty is correct," he said. "Withdrawing now would be read as weakness by every pack watching this situation unfold, and would likely encourage further aggression rather than preventing it." Alina looked between them, feeling increasingly trapped between conflicting instincts, the desire to protect herself and remove the source of political tension, against the reality that doing so might make the overall situation significantly worse. "What do you propose instead?" she asked finally. Kale exchanged a glance with his senior commanders before answering. "We will reinforce our northern border immediately," he said, "and we will send a formal message to Thornridge leadership, making clear that any aggression against Blackthorn territory, or against anyone under Blackthorn's protection, will be met with a full and decisive response." "That sounds like exactly the kind of confrontation that could lead to actual conflict," Alina said carefully. "Sometimes the only way to prevent conflict is to demonstrate unmistakable strength and resolve," Kale said. "Thornridge respects only power. If we appear hesitant or divided in any way, we invite exactly the kind of escalation we are trying to avoid." The war room fell into focused, urgent planning for the next several hours, commanders discussing troop placements, supply lines, and defensive strategies along the northern border. Alina remained throughout, offering what insight she could regarding the trade routes and merchant safety corridors that might be affected by increased military presence in the region. As the night wore on and the immediate crisis planning began winding down, Kale finally pulled Alina aside into a quiet corner of the war room, away from the ears of his commanders. "I need you to understand something," he said quietly. "Whatever happens over the coming days, I will not allow harm to come to you. Not because tradition demands it, but because I could not bear the alternative." Alina looked up at him, the weight of the entire crisis pressing down on both of them. "I am frightened," she admitted honestly, for the first time allowing herself to voice the fear she had been carefully suppressing. "I know," Cale said gently. "I am frightened as well. Not for myself, but for what Thornridge might attempt against you, or against this territory, in their effort to prove a point that was never true to begin with." "We did not choose any of this," Alina said quietly. "No," Cale agreed. "But we can choose how we respond to it. And I intend to respond with everything within my power to protect what matters, including you." Alina felt something steady itself within her chest at his words, a quiet resolve replacing some of the fear that had gripped her since the messenger first collapsed at the palace gates. Whatever storm Thornridge intended to unleash against Blackthorn, she realized, she would not face it as a helpless bystander waiting for others to protect her. She would face it standing firmly beside the king who had refused, from the very beginning, to let her carry this burden alone. Smoke rose from the northern watchtower before the sun had fully cleared the horizon, and Alina watched from the palace's highest balcony, as distant figures moved along the tree line like shadows through morning mist. 3 days had passed since the wounded scout arrived at the gates, and in that time, Blackthorn territory had transformed entirely. Soldiers filled the courtyards, supply wagons moved constantly between the palace and the northern border, and though no formal battle had yet erupted, the tension in the air had grown so thick that Alina found herself flinching at every sudden noise, every distant shout carried on the wind. Cale had spent most of those 3 days at the northern encampment, returning to the palace only briefly to coordinate with Corwin and the remaining council members before departing again. Alina had seen him only a handful of times, each encounter shorter and more strained than the last, his expression growing increasingly weighed down by the responsibility resting on his shoulders. On the morning of the 4th day, a formal envoy arrived from Thornridge territory, requesting an audience with King Cale Draven to discuss what they termed a peaceful resolution to the escalating tensions. Alina was present in the war room when the message arrived, watching as Corwin read the terms aloud to the assembled commanders. "They wish to meet at the border crossing," Corwin said, his voice careful and measured, "under a flag of parley. They claim to want to avoid unnecessary conflict." "Do we trust this offer?" one of the senior commanders asked skeptically. "We trust nothing from Thornridge without verification," Cale said firmly. "But we cannot ignore a formal offer of parley either. Not without risking accusations that Blackthorn refused a peaceful resolution." "The terms specify that the human liaison should accompany the king to the meeting," Corwin added carefully, his tone tightening slightly. "As proof, they claim, that Blackthorn's decisions are not being unduly influenced by outside interests." "Absolutely not," Cale said immediately, his voice sharp with refusal. "That is not a legitimate diplomatic requirement. That is an attempt to place her directly within reach of forces that have already threatened her life." Alina stepped forward before anyone could argue further. "If it helps prevent an actual war," she said quietly, "then perhaps I should go." Cale turned to her immediately, his expression fierce. "No," he said firmly. "I will not use you as a bargaining chip to appease Thornridge's demands." "This is not about being a bargaining chip," Alina said, meeting his gaze steadily despite the fear coiling tightly in her chest. "It is about proving, directly and unmistakably, that I am not some manipulative outside influence controlling Blackthorn's decisions. If seeing me stand beside you, speaking honestly and confidently, helps de-escalate this situation even slightly, then it is worth the risk." The war room fell into tense silence. Corwin exchanged a careful glance with Cale, clearly recognizing the strategic value in Alina's suggestion, even as he understood the personal danger it represented. "It could work in our favor," Corwin said cautiously. "If she stands beside you willingly and confidently, it directly contradicts the narrative Thornridge has been spreading about manipulation and instability within Blackthorn." Cale's jaw tightened, clearly torn between strategic necessity and personal fear for Alina's safety. "If we do this," he said finally, "security will be absolute, no exceptions, no compromises." "Agreed," Corwin said immediately. Cale turned back to Alina, his expression softening slightly despite the tension still evident in his shoulders. "Are you certain about this?" he asked quietly. "I am terrified," Alina admitted honestly, "but I am certain it is the right choice regardless." The following morning, Alina stood beside Cale at the border crossing, flanked by a heavily armed contingent of Blackthorn soldiers, watching as the Thornridge envoy approached from the opposite direction. The Thornridge delegation was led by a broad-shouldered man with cold, assessing eyes, introduced as General Draven Ashcombe, Thornridge's most senior military commander. "You honored the invitation," Ashcombe said, his gaze shifting between Kale and Alina with obvious calculation. "And you brought the human liaison herself." Bold, considering the accusations surrounding her presence. "I brought her because she chose to come," Kale said evenly. "Not because your terms demanded it." Ashcombe's eyes settled on Alina directly. "Tell me, human," he said, his tone carrying a subtle challenge. "Do you understand what you have caused within Blackthorn's court? The instability, the division, the questions surrounding whether your presence here reflects genuine wolf tradition or simple manipulation?" Alina held his gaze steadily, refusing to let her fear show despite the pounding of her heart. "I understand exactly what has happened," she said clearly. "I made an honest mistake upon arriving here, nothing more. What followed was not manipulation, but an ancient instinct entirely beyond anyone's control, including my own." "And you expect us to simply accept that explanation," Ashcombe said skeptically. "I expect you to recognize the truth when you see it," Alina replied, her voice growing steadier with each word. "I did not seek power, influence, or political advantage. I sought a simple trade agreement that would benefit both human settlements and shifter territories alike. Whatever else has followed was never within my control, and continuing to use it as justification for aggression serves no purpose except escalating a conflict that benefits no one." Ashcombe studied her for a long, tense moment, clearly weighing her words against whatever preconceived narrative he had arrived with. Finally, his expression shifted slightly, something like grudging respect flickering behind his calculating eyes. "You speak with more conviction than most humans I have encountered," he admitted. "I speak with the conviction of someone who has nothing to hide," Alina replied. The negotiations that followed stretched through the remainder of the day, Kale and Ashcombe working carefully through the underlying tensions between their two territories, while Alina remained present throughout, offering calm, measured responses whenever questions arose regarding her own role in the unfolding situation. By evening, a fragile but genuine agreement had been reached, both sides committing to withdraw their forces from the border and resume formal diplomatic channels rather than continued military posturing. As the Thornridge delegation finally departed, Kale turned to Alina, his expression a complex mixture of relief and quiet admiration. "You may have just prevented a war," he said quietly. "We prevented a war," Alina corrected gently. "Together." Kale's expression softened further, something warm and unguarded finally breaking through the careful composure he had maintained throughout the tense negotiations. "Together," he agreed. As they made their way back toward the palace, the setting sun casting long golden light across the northern fields, Alina felt something settle firmly within her chest, a quiet certainty that whatever remained of the political storm surrounding her presence at Blackthorn, she would face it not as a helpless outsider, caught in circumstances beyond her control, but as someone who had earned her place standing directly beside the king through her own courage and conviction. News of the border agreement reached the palace before Alina and Kale had even finished the return journey, and by the time they arrived home, the entire court had already gathered in the Great Hall, buzzing with a mixture of relief and renewed curiosity. Alina had expected the successful negotiation to ease the tension surrounding her presence, and in many ways it did, servants and guards greeting her with genuine warmth for the first time since her arrival, several council members offering quiet words of respect for her role in preventing what could have become a devastating conflict. But not everyone within the court had softened their suspicions so easily. Lady Seraphine found her the following afternoon in a quiet reading room near the palace library, her expression carrying the same cold calculation Alina had come to recognize immediately. "You handled the border negotiation admirably," Seraphine said, though her tone suggested the compliment cost her considerable effort. "I will admit, I did not expect that." "Thank you," Alina said carefully, unsure whether this conversation would end in genuine reconciliation or renewed hostility. "But admirable diplomacy does not erase the underlying question," Seraphine continued, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Whether your presence here reflects genuine fate, or an extraordinarily convenient coincidence that has reshaped the entire balance of power within this court." Alina set down the book she had been holding and met Seraphine's gaze directly, tired of dancing carefully around the same accusation over and over again. "I understand this has been difficult for you," she said honestly. "I understand you had expectations regarding your own future within this court, expectations that shifted the moment Kale's wolf reacted to me in that throne room. But I did not choose this situation, Seraphine, any more than you chose to lose whatever future you had imagined for yourself here." Seraphine's expression flickered, something raw and unguarded slipping through her carefully maintained composure for just a moment. You cannot possibly understand what it means to build your entire identity around an expectation, only to watch it dissolve in a single unplanned moment, she said quietly. You are right, Alina admitted. I cannot fully understand that, but I can understand disappointment and loss, and the frustration of watching your life shift in ways you never anticipated or chose. I have felt all of those things myself over these past few weeks. Seraphine studied her for a long moment, the hostility in her expression slowly giving way to something more contemplative. Perhaps, she said finally, we have both been navigating circumstances neither of us truly chose. Perhaps, Alina agreed. They did not become friends in that moment, the wound of Seraphine's disappointed expectations still too raw for genuine warmth, but something shifted between them nonetheless, the sharp hostility softening into something more resembling reluctant, cautious respect. That evening, Cale requested Alina's presence in the palace gardens, and she found him waiting near the same stone path where they had walked together weeks earlier, his expression thoughtful as he watched the last light of sunset fade behind the surrounding hills. I have been thinking, he said as she approached, about everything that has happened since you arrived here. So have I, Alina admitted. Cale turned to face her fully, his expression more open and vulnerable than she had seen since their very first private conversation. When my wolf reacted to you that day, he said carefully, I told myself I would never pressure you into accepting a bond you did not choose freely. I have tried to honor that promise, even when every instinct within me wanted something more. I have noticed, Alina said softly, and I am grateful for it. But I need you to know something clearly, Cale continued, taking a slow step closer. Whatever my wolf recognized in that throne room, my own feelings toward you have grown into something entirely separate from mere instinct. I have watched you navigate impossible political pressure with courage and conviction. I have watched you stand before a hostile general and speak truth without flinching. I have watched you extend grace toward Seraphine despite her hostility toward you. And somewhere along the way, Alina, I stopped simply recognizing you as my fated mate, and started genuinely, deeply caring for you as the remarkable person you actually are. Alina felt her breath catch in her throat, the weight of his words settling warmly into her chest. I have felt something shifting within myself as well, she admitted quietly. I came here terrified of an instinct I did not choose and did not understand. But somewhere over these past few weeks, that fear transformed into something else entirely, something that feels far more like genuine choice than obligation. Cale's expression softened further, hope flickering behind his careful composure. What are you saying? He asked quietly. I am saying, Alina said, closing the remaining distance between them, that whatever your wolf recognized that first day, I am choosing this now, fully and consciously, because of who you actually are, not because ancient instinct demands it. Cale's hand rose gently to cup her face, his touch careful and reverent. Alina Marsh, he said quietly, you arrived in this palace exhausted, unprepared, and utterly unaware of the chaos your accidental words would unleash. And somehow, through all of that chaos, you have become the steadiest, most remarkable person I have ever known. Alina smiled softly, tears gathering unexpectedly at the corners of her eyes. I suppose calling the Alpha King sweetie by accident turned out better than I expected, she said. Cale laughed, the sound warm and genuine, echoing softly through the quiet garden. Considerably better, he agreed, before leaning down to press a gentle, careful kiss against her forehead, a promise of everything still unfolding between them. As they stood together beneath the darkening sky, the weight of political storms and rival threats momentarily forgotten, Alina felt a quiet, unshakable certainty settle firmly within her chest. Whatever challenges still remained ahead, she would face them not as a reluctant participant caught in circumstances beyond her control, but as someone who had genuinely, freely chosen the path now stretching out before her. The great hall had never held so many people at once, and Alina's hands trembled slightly as she stood behind the tall wooden doors, listening to the low murmur of the assembled court beyond. Weeks had passed since the border agreement with Thornridge, weeks filled with careful diplomatic follow-up, cautious rebuilding of trust between the two territories, and quiet, steady growth in the relationship between Alina and Cale that neither of them had rushed or forced. Today, however, marked something different entirely. A formal court gathering Cale had called specifically to address, once and for all, the rumors and accusations that had followed Alina since her very first day at Blackthorn. Are you ready? Milo asked quietly beside her, his expression a mixture of nervous excitement and genuine warmth. As ready as I will ever be, Alina admitted. The great doors opened, and Alina stepped into the hall, immediately aware of hundreds of eyes turning toward her, just as they had on that very first chaotic day. But this time, she noticed, the expressions watching her carried something different. Curiosity mixed with cautious respect rather than the suspicious hostility that had greeted her arrival weeks earlier. Kale stood at the center of the raised platform near his throne, dressed formally in dark ceremonial robes, his expression steady and composed despite the weight of what he was about to address publicly. As Alina approached, walking the same path she had walked on her very first day, she caught sight of Lady Seraphine standing near the front of the assembled nobles, her expression unreadable but notably absent of the hostility that had once defined her every glance toward Alina. When Alina reached the base of the platform, Kale descended the steps to meet her, extending his hand, which she took without hesitation. "Members of this court," Kale began, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. "Several weeks ago, in this very room, an honest mistake occurred. A tired, unprepared trade liaison, unaware of who stood before her, offered a simple, casual greeting that triggered a reaction none of us had witnessed in over a decade. A ripple of quiet murmurs passed through the crowd, memories of that chaotic first day clearly still fresh in everyone's minds. Since that day," Kale continued, "rumors and accusations have circulated throughout this court, questioning whether that reaction reflected genuine truth or careful manipulation. I understand why such doubts arose. Trust is not easily extended, particularly when unexpected events threaten established expectations within this court." He turned to look directly at Alina, his expression softening. "But I stand before you today to address these doubts directly and honestly. My wolf's reaction that day was neither manufactured nor manipulated. It was genuine, ancient instinct recognizing something none of us could have anticipated. However," he continued, turning back to address the assembled court, "I did not choose to stand beside Alina Marsh today, simply because of what my wolf recognized weeks ago." The hall fell into complete silence, every noble and guard leaning forward slightly to hear his next words. "I choose her," Kale said clearly, "because of who she has proven herself to be through every trial this court has placed before her. I choose her because she stood before a hostile Thornridge general and spoke truth without flinching, preventing a war that could have devastated both our territories. I choose her because she extended grace and understanding toward those who doubted and accused her, rather than responding with bitterness or resentment. I choose her because, quite simply, she has become the person I trust most completely in this entire kingdom." Alina felt tears gathering in her eyes as Kale's words settled over the silent hall, the weight of everything they had endured together finally reaching its resolution. "Today," Kale continued, raising Alina's hand gently within his own, "I formally declare Alina Marsh as my chosen mate, not merely as a result of ancient wolf instinct, but as my own conscious, deliberate choice, made freely and completely." The hall erupted into a mixture of reactions, some nobles breaking into genuine applause, others exchanging quiet, contemplative glances as they processed the formal declaration. Near the front of the crowd, Alina noticed Lady Seraphine watching with an expression that, while still carrying traces of old disappointment, held something else as well, something that looked almost like acceptance. Corwin stepped forward from his position near the throne, addressing the assembled court with quiet authority. "Let it be known," he announced formally, "that the alliance between Blackthorn territory and the human settlements stands stronger today than at any point in recent history, secured not merely through trade agreements, but through the genuine bond between our king and his chosen mate." As the formal ceremony concluded and the court slowly dispersed into celebration, Alina found herself standing quietly beside Kale near the edge of the great hall, watching the scene that had once felt so threatening now transform into something warm and celebratory. "Do you have any regrets?" Kale asked quietly, glancing down at her with genuine curiosity. "About any of this? The chaos, the danger, the political storms we navigated together?" Alina considered the question carefully before answering. "I regret the fear," she admitted honestly. "I regret the danger we both faced, and the uncertainty that plagued those early weeks. But I do not regret a single moment of choosing this, choosing you, freely and completely." Kale's expression softened into something deeply warm and genuine. "Even though it all began with an accidental sweetie?" he asked, a teasing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Alina laughed, the sound light and genuine, echoing softly through the gradually emptying hall. "Especially because it began that way," she said. "Some of the best things in life begin with an honest, unplanned mistake." As evening settled over Blackthorn Palace, the celebration continuing warmly around them, Alina looked out over the court that had once regarded her with suspicion and hostility, now gathered in genuine celebration of the bond she shared with their king. She thought of the exhausted, unprepared woman who had stumbled into that throne room weeks earlier, utterly unaware of the chaos her simple, accidental words would set into motion. That woman could never have imagined where this unexpected path would eventually lead, standing here now, chosen freely and completely by a king who had learned to love her not through ancient instinct alone, but through genuine, deliberate choice, forged through courage, honesty, and quiet, steady conviction. Whatever challenges still awaited them in the future, Alina knew now, with complete and unwavering certainty, that she would face every single one of them standing exactly where she belonged, beside Kael Draven, not as fate had simply decided, but as she herself had genuinely and freely chosen.